Hey everyone, I'm here in our school's high school makerspace, the SSIS Idea Center. One thing I promote in my role as secondary STEM coordinator is the need for everyone to be engaged in the process of design and making. This isn't something that just students should be experiencing. Learning to design and use design tools is essential for everyone in the school community. The challenge, though, is always in the details. I get asked all the time by students if I can help them make something. And the answer is, of course, yes. My colleagues ask me the same question. And of course, since I love making things, it's really fun for me to do the work. That, however, doesn't really help me share that vision of everyone not just needing these skills, but developing things for themselves. And so last night, I got a request from one of my viewers out there, Carlos. Carlos is a PE teacher here at SSIS, a tech master and an all-around great guy. So Carlos writes, "This is a Wilson stencil to put the W on your tennis racket strings with a special paint. You think we could whip this up?" Thanks for your question, Carlos. Of course we can. But instead of just doing this for you, I'm going to bring you and all of the viewers along. I'm going to take you through the process from start to finish of making this using the resources here in the Idea Center. I hope that my colleagues can learn that this is something that they can do. And then they can then help me promote the idea that all of us can be and should be designers and makers. So let's get started. Now, I'd like to give you as much of a real-time view of how I do this so that you can understand some of the time involved. I'll also introduce some of the resources that I'll be using. The first thing is this worldvectorlogo.com, which Carlos actually sent me a link to, and they have a lot of SVG logos of a whole bunch of companies out there. Now, SVG is a special format that, unlike most image formats, doesn't change resolution as you zoom in. It doesn't get pixelated because it's a perfect mathematical representation of the curves and lines that it takes to make something. And so when we're making something on the laser cutter, which I decided was the best way to do this, we always want to use SVG. Now, the reason I'm using the laser cutter as opposed to a 3D printer or something else like that is that this is a 2D design. It's really a two-dimensional logo, and all we want to do is be able to cut out that shape from some kind of material. I'm planning on using a piece of poster board to make the stencil. And so since this is one of the materials a laser cutter can handle, I decided the laser cutter would be the best way to do this. 3D printers aren't really suited for this kind of activity. If you're making something 3D that is complex, a 3D printer might make a bit more sense. So we're going to use the laser cutter, and if we're using the laser cutter, typically an SVG is the way we want to do it. So I'm going to download the SVG file to my computer. All right. The next thing is I need to open this file, and I need to make it so that I can actually edit this file and make it the way it needs to be so that the laser cutter can accept it. To do this, I use a program called Inkscape. Inkscape is a free piece of software that lets you edit vector-based images like SVG files. And so you can download it. This is inkscape.org. Go to the download page, and you can download it. I've already done this download, so I can save a little bit of time. So let's take a look at Inkscape and see what happens when we bring the logo into it. Okay, so here we are in Inkscape, and I'm just going to go to the SVG file here in Safari, grab it, and bring it over into Inkscape. And I'm going to include the SVG image. Everything looks good here, and I'll hit OK. All right, so there we have it, and I want to set a couple things about this. Carlos gave me some information about the size of his racket, and I want to be able to make it so that this image fits the size of his racket. You can see up here I can set the measurements. I'm going to put this in centimeters, and I'm going to lock the aspect ratio so that when I resize this, make it bigger and smaller, it keeps all of the proportions of the shape the same. Okay, now I know that we really only need this portion of the image for the purpose of designing the cutout. So I want to break this up into a couple pieces. I'm going to select the logo, I'm going to do a 2-finger click, and I'm going to do ungroup. And take a look at what that gives me. And you'll see that now we have a few different pieces to this overall logo that we can now play around with. So this here is just the W part, and I'm going to get rid of this red background. Now it's kind of disappeared on us, but I know where I put it. And now what we want to do is we want to play around with the settings on this and make it so it's not invisible anymore. So I'm going to go to Objects, Fill and Stroke, and this lets me change some of the properties of the SVG. Now an SVG has two properties. It has the outline path and it has the inside. And those are two different colors usually, and so you can change those colors manually. Right now the fill is it's all white. You can see if I change these numbers a little bit, that changes the fill. I don't actually want there to be any fill on this image. We'll get to that in a bit. I'm going to go to Stroke Paint, and now the stroke is the outline. And I do want to play around with the outline, because that is the part that ultimately is going to be cut out. So now that I can see this, I'm going to go back to Fill, and I'm going to take away the fill for this image and just make it so that we have the outline. The other thing that I want to do is I don't want this registered trademark thing. So I'm going to see if I can select just that part of the image. And it doesn't quite look like it. So I'm going to select just this portion of the image. See if I can change it. Okay, so the challenge here is that all of this has been linked as a single outline. And so I need to break this apart a little bit. I want to get rid of this part of the curve. So I need to play around with that. So I'm going to make a little box around these. Hit delete, and now I'm left with just the part of the curve that I want to use. Okay. And so the next thing that I want to play with is the size of this. Now what Carlos told me is that his racquet, let's check his note here, his racquet is 22 centimeters wide and 30 centimeters tall. And so that's just for the oval portion. And so to help me with this, I'm going to make an oval that has those dimensions on it. So I'll make a little oval. And then I'm going to set its properties up here so that the height is 30 centimeters tall. And I'm going to make the width 22 centimeters wide. And so that is, oops, I had the aspect ratio down in there, so let me put this back to 30. Okay, and so that is the actual size of the racquet. It's the actual size of what we want to use for this cutout. So here is the W. I'm going to move it around, move it down, so that it is in the center of our. So I'm going to zoom out. I'm also going to change the document properties and make it the size of the laser cutter. I'm going to use inches for this. So the width is 40 inches by 28. And so this is going to help me visualize a little bit about how this is going to be positioned in the laser cutter. So I'm going to move this loop, which represents the inside of the racquet, up a little bit. And then I'm going to move the W so it's centered inside. Okay, looks pretty good. And I'm also going to try to make this as large inside of the racquet as possible so that we get a really nice stencil there. I'm going to click the lock button and just make it a little bit bigger. All right. And let's check the image one more time and see if we can make this as close to what the image is as possible. So it's looking pretty good. Looks like it's roughly centered, looking pretty sharp. Just tweak it a little bit, and then I think we'll be ready to go. All right, so it's looking pretty good. That's basically what I want to cut out. I want my laser to go around this entire outline right here for the inside of the racket, and also do this on the inside for the actual design on the strings. So there are a couple things you need to know when you're preparing something for the laser cutter. One thing to know is that if you want the laser cutter to cut something out, the laser cutter can identify automatically what you want it to cut by setting the width of the line in the drawing to be below a certain value. And so what I do is I do Command A to select everything in the drawing, and then I go to Stroke Paint. Let's go to Stroke Paint, just make sure it's all black, looks good. And then we go to Stroke Style, and I'm going to select inches on this one. And so for our laser cutter, anything that is selected with a 0.001 inch width will be cut automatically. So that's looking good. And now I'm going to save this, and I'm going to save this as tennis racket, and I'm going to save it as a PDF. Now the reason I use a PDF is that sometimes a previous version of Inkscape, when you saved it as an SVG, it didn't always go correctly to the laser cutter. So my default is to use a PDF as my export format. So everything is looking good. All right. And that's that. So now I'm going to send this PDF to the computer, which is connected to the laser cutter, and we are going to make this. See you over there. Here we are. You can see the screen. This is the screen on a computer that we use for the laser cutter. And I have the laser cutter. This is an Epilog Fusion M2, ready to go. And so I've decided to use this poster board as my material for the stencil. And I put that in the bed, ready to go. And we'll go through calibrating that in just a bit. But here on the computer, I have loaded up that image that I made on the other screen. And getting it going is almost as simple as just kind of printing a document onto a regular printer. We'll go to Print, and we'll go to Properties. And what we're going to be doing is we can now tell the laser cutter what settings we want to use. This is the speed that the laser head is going to be moving around the material, and this is the power that the laser is going to use as it cuts. And the one place you go if you want to know what speed and power to use is, well, there are a couple places we could go. One thing that we have is this little handy guide that the STEM Assistant put together, which has a whole bunch of pairs of speed and power. But the other place that you can go is the manual for the laser cutter, and it actually has recommended power levels for different materials. The only thing that varies is the speed and the power. So if you're using plastic or you're using wood, this file is going to be exactly the same pretty much, and we're just going to change the speed and the power. So for this cardboard, I've found that 40% speed is pretty good, and we're going to use 100% power. I'm going to hit OK. We're going to hit Print. See, the tennis racket has been loaded over here onto the laser cutter. Now what I need to do is I need to tell the laser cutter where exactly to make the cut. So I'm going to take this little doohickey here. This is for focusing the laser. And what I want to do is I can lower and raise the bed of the laser cutter up and down. And what I want to do is position it so that it just touches that little gauge, just like that. And I can turn it left and get a much finer precision. So we'll do that, looking pretty good. And I will hit the OK button, and that sets the focus at that location to be 0. Now I need to tell the laser cutter where my 0, 0 is. So it has this nice little laser dot right there that tells you where its 0, 0 is going to be. And so I'm going to move that along, move it to the back corner. Right about there, looks pretty good. And so one more time, I press in to set that as the 0, 0, and we're good to go. Everything is looking sharp. Close the laser cutter. I'm going to turn on our filter, which will take care of some of the smoke. And let's watch it go. Now on cardboard like this, I actually like to run it 2 times. So I'm going to run it a second time all around and check out to see how it did. Okay, and so you can see the filter is helping to pull some of that smoke out. And so what I'm going to do is open it up and take a quick look, but I'm not going to move it. So we've done 2 cuts on the shape. One thing I've learned about this particular material that can be helpful in cutting it out is I'm now going to move the bed down, up just a little bit. And what that's going to do is it's going to focus the laser toward the bottom of the surface. And so that's going to help with the final cutout. So let's run that. Okay, now it is tempting to try to pick it up and just see if it is cut all the way out. But the moment you move the material, you might knock it out of alignment so that the next time, if it doesn't cut all the way through, it might not be lined up. So it's always good to cut a couple times just to make sure that it's all the way through, so you're really sure. So I'm going to run this just one more time to be absolutely sure. And so I'm really glad I did that, because you can see I definitely went all the way through, because as it cut, these pieces just sort of come right off the surface really nicely. Look at that. And that's it. So here we have it. Here's the stencil made out of cardboard. Now I use cardboard for this, partly because we may not know if it's gonna work exactly the way we want. And before we use maybe a more expensive material like acrylic, we wanna make sure that the shape and the size is generally what we're looking for. So I'm gonna send this to Carlos, see if it meets his needs, and it might just be enough to get him that awesome W on his tennis racket. So I hope this inspires you to try to make something yourself for being made on a laser cutter. I know you probably don't need the specific thing to be made, but you might have ideas on what you would like to make that might follow the same approach. Be sure to contact me if you have any questions. Have a great day. Thanks for watching.